I declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed.
Hey, I have a question. I wasn't in that story.
It's not a question. I got a better one. So who did it?
What?
Who's the killer?
You're not supposed to know who did it.
Exactly, it's odd.
Aren't smart.
You thought that was smart?
Hey!
What? No, that's not what I meant.
Look, it's a scary mystery.
Wait, that was supposed to be a scary story?
Yes, that's why it was told at the Midnight Society, Like in Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Oh, I thought you guys were my fan club.
What?
What? Look, I want another story that makes sense.
And that's scary.
Fine. Instappen, jongens. Die Griezelbus vertrekt zo dadelijk. Meester,
What was that?
Ooh, vampire language.
Now, it's Dutch. The story is Dutch.
Oh, can't you translate it?
Man, you know how much work that is?
Can't you summarize it then?
Alright, but if it's no longer scary, that's on you guys. Submit it for the approval of the Midnight Society. I call this story The Griezelbus, which I will refer to as the horror bus, to make it easier on all of us, is a horror book series written by Paul van Loon for children. These are horror stories made for children, but I remember them to be quite gruesome, some of these, and I would like to talk about some of these today. I want to talk about the writer, Paul van Loon, who's pretty well decorated in the Netherlands. And I want to talk about the stories that connect all these books together. And of course, I want to talk about the smaller stories within these books. You can kind of see them as an anthology series that are connected by a thread all throughout. Now, there's been 8 books written in total. I do not count the last 2 books in the series, and we'll get into why. I want to talk about the horror bus tonight. Let's talk about the writer a little bit first. Paul van Loon was born on April 17th in 1955. You can find him in most of the books. He has pictures of himself, and he was part of this universe, and more than just for his namesake. We'll get into that a little bit too. So he liked to call his own style groomer, which is a combination of the word griezelen and humor in Dutch. Griezelen is also what the franchise is technically called, the Griezelbus. It's a hard word to translate into English. It technically means creep, but it can also mean to scare. And when I did some research online about what to call this in English, I originally was going to call it the creep bus, but people online refer to it as the horror bus, so that's what I'm going to do as well. Paul van Loon wrote over 100 children's books. Some of those actually received awards also. Not only did his books receive awards, he himself was knighted by the Order of Orange Nassau, which is the Order of Knights in the Netherlands. And the writer himself was borderline a self-insert character in these books. He himself was a mystery. Sometimes in these books at the end he was described as a creepy dark figure. He would only write at night when the horror would strike. So the mystery of the writer himself as a child was already pretty creepy to begin with. The original book, the very first horror bus, which I still have my first edition copy. Back then, sequels weren't even planned yet at all. It was just the horror bus. There's no one behind it. It's like first edition copy. You won't find this cover art a lot online anymore. That shows that I was there from the start. So this released in 1991. In 1991, I was 7 years old. And I'm not gonna lie, when you're 7 years old, some of these stories hit pretty hard. I feel even now today, some of these stories are pretty spooky. As of now, it's been 15 years since the last book. For me, it's been 20 years since the last official book. So why do I keep saying this? There's 8 books in the series. You have the Horribus 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then Paul Van Loan released a prequel, the Horribus 0, followed by the Horribus 5, which completes the story. It actually brings it back to the original Horribus. It's actually really well done. After that, they released a movie.
Je bent heel bijzonder, Onnoval. Je schrijft zulke mooie verhalen.
Schrijf jij wel eens dingen die het daglicht niet kunnen verdragen? Dat zijn gevaarlijke verhalen, jongeman. Blijf dan uit de buurt van Verlucci.
I didn't like this movie. It was really bad. I got excited for this in the beginning because, you know, it's a children's horror movie about one of my favorite franchises. I'm like, let's go. And then it had nothing to do with the first 5 books. Not only that, it was just bad. Okay, it was just bad. I felt it ruined a lot of the lore from the franchise. But they made a book about the movie, which they called the Horribus 6. So it's not even the movie is based on the books, but has nothing to do with it. So they made a book based on the movie, and it's bad. It's even worse because it's not even a book written as a book. It's a book written as a movie. And they followed it with a sequel that is not a sequel to the original books, but it's a book sequel to the book of the movie. It became a mess, and I wasn't happy with it. It doesn't really matter. The original story honestly ends after the Horribus 5. But so what are these books actually about? I'm gonna have some spoilers in this. I feel I should give a warning either way. These books are over 30 years old and they're Dutch. I highly doubt anybody's gonna be interested in them, but I feel like talking about some specifics about the story. So, as I mentioned before, the original book was written in 1991. It revolves around a horror writer who invites grade 5, a class of children and a teacher, to go on a little school trip. The school trip is just the children sitting in the bus listening to the horror stories this writer wrote. So the book is divided between the main thread and individual unrelated horror stories. There's 9 stories revolving 9 objects the writer has in the bus, and the final story revolves around the writer. The bus is driven by a skeleton, and somehow the writer convinces people it's just a guy in a costume when it's clearly like a real skeleton. So stuff is afoot. Over the story, between each horror story, we learn more about the writer and his eventual goal. The story ends. The writer turns out to be a werewolf, which I always thought was funny because he looks like a vampire, but we'll get back into that as well. And one of the children actually has a gun with a silver bullet and kills the werewolf. It's brutal. And that's like the main thread. And this sets the rest in motion. Now, originally, Paul Van Loan meant this just as a single book. But people really wanted a sequel. So he was thinking, how am I going to make a sequel to this? Until he learned of a myth where sometimes, a real life myth where sometimes dead werewolves become vampires. Enter Book 2. The Horribus 2 has my personal favorite setting of the entire franchise. It revolves around 4 children, and the 4 children go to a car cemetery. In the car cemetery, they find the wreckage of the original bus of the first book. They go inside the bus, they get trapped. An announcer over the radio starts telling horror stories. So in the same vein as the first book, you got a main thread separated by individually unrelated horror stories. Meanwhile, a skeleton steps in the bus and starts driving it. Along the way, creepy creatures get into the bus as well. The children, of course, get more and more freaked out. The horror stories continue, culminating into another climax where the bus was driving towards a cemetery where P. Onneval, the horror writer from the first book, rises up from the grave as a vampire, and he needs to feed on these children in order to become a full-fledged vampire and become alive again. Or undead alive again, I guess. Onneval gets defeated at the end, and everything seems to be okay, except that one of the 4 children starts acting a little bit strange. Now, I could get into the story of every book. When I say every book, I mean the first 6 books. We're never talking about these other 2 again. So the first 6 books, which is their own complete story. So as the books progress, characters come back, they behave strange, characters move on. The story actually progresses separated by these individual little horror stories. And that's something I always like, is there is a big thread. It makes sense. Each book is their own book, connecting all books, including individual little horror stories that, again, as a child, some of these definitely freaked me out. Over the course of the story, we learn who P. Onneval is. What is the purpose of the horror bus itself, or Bones, the skeleton who's driving it. We learn about the devil. The devil is involved in all of this. There's ranks in this whole story. It goes pretty deep. And again, every time we see old characters return, it's unsettling, it's unnerving. You don't recognize them because they all act strange. What's going on? There's different locations and everything. And in the end, everything always connects back to the horror bus. The overall plot is just really cool, and it keeps you interested in all these books. But outside of the main plot, there are, like I mentioned several times, the individual horror stories. So what are these stories about? Why does P. Onneval need these stories to scare the children? And are they actually scary stories? I already mentioned how the main plot goes pretty extreme. But some of these smaller stories definitely freaked me out as a kid. And I just want to describe some of these without obviously going into all these stories of all these books. I just want to give you a little bit of a taste of what these stories are about. The first book has the story revolve around 9 objects, like I said in the beginning. The other books can either revolve around objects or the idea of love. I think the second book focuses on the love of the parents, the love of a grandmother. Another book focuses on locations. So there is an overall theme in general to the horror stories, even though they are unrelated. The first book, for example, has a horror story revolving around a painting. The painting is cursed. A father buys a painting. He's so proud of it, he wants to hang it up in his house. His wife and his son cannot stand this painting. It freaks them out. Over the course of the story, the father behaves more and more weirdly to the point where he tries to kill his own son. Usually these stories are told from the perspective of the children. Again, these are children horror books. I was 7 when I started reading these, and then like I said, 2 or 3 years separate each book. So you have to take into account that maybe some of these stories don't sound very extreme. Maybe some of them sounds pretty bad, because as a 7-year-old, you're learning that your dad is entranced by this painting and he's trying to kill you. It's pretty extreme. We have another story where a little girl, she goes to a pet store. The pet store seems very strange to her. The animals don't really seem alive. She just wants some cat grass to buy for her cat. And then she realizes that the guy who's selling the cat grass, he's really freaky. Then she understands that these animals aren't actually alive. They're all dead. They're all embalmed. And the setting alone is already kind of freaky. And then she goes home. And the cat grass comes alive and takes over her entire room and tries to kill her and her cat. One of my personal favorite stories is very reminiscent of the Never-Ending Story. And I kind of want to tell a little bit more about this story, because I absolutely love how this story kind of comes full circle. The story revolves around a boy and he's getting bullied. I feel a lot of stories actually revolve around bullying. But so this boy, he's chased by these bullies and he hides into an antique store. There's a very creepy man in the antique store. All the mirrors are covered. He can't really see what's going on. And the man's trying to talk to him. The kid doesn't really care. He just wants to go home. He's enough of being bullied and stuff. But then he thinks this man is trying to sell him like a weapon. But the man doesn't have a weapon. The man has an amulet. So he tells this kid, I have this amulet. It can make you very powerful. It can protect you. This kid is like, whatever. He takes the amulet. The bullies find him again the next day. I think it's the next day. The bullies find him again. They find him in the store, I think even. He puts on the amulet And without understanding why, the kids get really scared of him and they run away. They're like, sorry, we have the wrong guy. They leave. Over the course of the story, these bullies get more and more afraid of him. And he understands that this amulet is giving him this power. He doesn't understand what this power is, but it makes him feel incredible. He goes back to all the previous bullies that attacked him in his past. Each time he puts on the amulet and he scares them. Stuff happens in his real life. A man is riding his bike. There's an accident. The man breaks all his eggs. He gets angry at the kid. The kid puts on the amulet again. The guy gets really scared of what he's seeing and he goes away. So, we learn that each time he puts on the amulet, he looks like a horrific creature. That's why people don't recognize him. His eyes are sunken in. He looks really old and gross and dirty. His teeth are all big. It doesn't make any sense. And then the more he uses the amulet, the more he becomes this character, to the point where his mother starts not recognizing him anymore. She's like, oh, have you grown bigger? Your hair's grown longer, your teeth are grown longer. Are you getting enough sleep? Your eyes look weird. So more and more, he becomes the creature that comes out when he puts on the amulet, to the point where he doesn't need the amulet anymore. At the end, he has become the creature. He goes back to the antique store to return this amulet and complain. He's like, look, you gotta take this amulet back. Like, it made me into a monster. And then the guy, he's just like, sorry, kid, I can't take this amulet back. I've been waiting 30 years for somebody to take this amulet off my hands. And now I'm free. And now it's your burden. The guy leaves the store. And now the kid is the new owner trapped in the store, hoping that someday another person will take this amulet for him to transfer the curse. And he destroys all the mirrors. He's freaking out. And his final thought is, I should probably clean up the store, because tomorrow new customers could come in. I always loved this story. So something that is fun about these stories is that all these books, the first 6 actual books, have artwork done by the same person, Camilla Fiałkowski. She does the artwork for all these books, and every story has its own artwork. The story I just mentioned now also has an artwork that I always really like, where you can see the kid go into the room, into the antique store, to bring back the amulet. I always loved this art in the past as a kid, and still to this day I really enjoy looking at these images. So, as I grew up with the books, I honestly feel that the books grew up with me. The stories over the course of these books become darker, more gruesome, and honestly more intelligent also, I feel, with crazy plot twists and everything. I absolutely love this franchise, and I just really felt like sharing some of that with all of you today. The story of P. Onneval, encompassed within the Horribus, written by Dutch author Paul van Loon. If you're interested in these stories, I think they were also released in the UK, so English copies should exist. And I think that's maybe where the term the Horribus comes from. I think that's what they were originally released at, outside of the Netherlands. I hope you enjoyed some of these stories. I just wanted to bring something to the internet that maybe is not very widely known out there. I think these stories hold up. As a kid, they used to scare me. And even now, I feel as an adult, they actually hold up. Some of these stories are pretty deep and dark. And the more the series progressed, the darker and more serious they became. As if they grew up with me. The horror progressed to adapt to my new brain, you might say. And they're absolutely worth checking out. But even if you won't, I hope you still like this video, some of these scary stories. I wish I could talk about all these stories, but I don't have 5 hours to talk about all these stories and all these plots. I just want to give a general gist about the whole story and the individual stories. Stuff that scared me as a kid, and that maybe in the future might scare your kids. Maybe you will look into them. Maybe you will tell these stories to the next generation. I hope that someday I could tell these stories to the next generation. It would be incredible sharing some of the horror that plagued my brain as a child. I declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed.
Hey, I wasn't in that story either.
Oh my god.
It was scary though.
Yeah, especially that last book, but not in a good way.
Tell it again in Dutch.
No, thank you. Can't we just end the...
Wait.
What?
Robert, what's that behind you?
Bro, what are you, 5?
No, seriously, there's something behind you. Robert, watch out! Careful, Robert, no! Robert! Robert, what's happening? Robert! Robert, are you okay? Robert, no! What's up?
This is the worst fan club ever.
I want to thank my girlfriend, Midnight Owl, for being a part of this video, and my friend Robert of Gaming With Me, who did these skits together with me. I hope you liked it. I had a lot of fun writing these skits and doing them, and I feel you should check out their channels. I will link their channels below. Midnight Owl does a lot of goth content herself. There's like Halloween shopping, makeup stuff, dark tourism, Renaissance fairs. You can find anything dark and creepy on Midnight Owl's channel. And Robert of Gaming With Me does a lot of gaming content. He has a big series going on, Back at the Backlog, where he reviews games he never played before. And in each of these videos he does his own skit in the beginning and at the end of the video, which is why I wanted him to be part of this video as well, because I just love his skits and I wanted him to be part of this. Hope you enjoyed this video and this skit. Check out Midnight Owl and Robert of Gaming With Me. The links will be in the video description. And subscribe to me as well if you haven't yet. I do a lot of goth related stuff myself. I review movies, I react to trailers, I do dark tourism. There's a very cool dark tourism related video coming up still before Halloween. It's gonna be pretty good. I'm very excited for this video. It's gonna be dark tourism related. You won't have seen much like this online. It's gonna be absolutely insane. Like, it's crazy I can even post it on YouTube. That's how insane it actually is. Not to like give too much away, but definitely check out my next video coming up for Halloween. Subscribe for more content like that. Subscribe to these guys. Thank you all for watching. And as always, be kind to one another, even in the dark.